Hey, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show. Thanks for tuning in to the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM. If you're interested in sponsoring my show, you can send me an email to the Mike Wagner Show at gmail.com, or you could also donate to the podcast. Just go to the Donate Listen site, and you can also donate whatever you like. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. For those who are interested, Anchor can give you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. We've got creation tools, allows you to record and edit podcasts so it sounds great, and they'll distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere. Spotify, Apple, Google, many more. And you can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership. So download the Anchor app for free or go to Anchor FM to get started.
It's now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show brings you famous celebrities and amazing people from all over the world. Listen online at themikewagnershow.com and on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And watch the interview on YouTube. So sit back and relax and enjoy the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking at a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can check our Facebook page at Facebook.com/The Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also on Radio Public, Anchor FM, and also watch the interview on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on YouTube and take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with a wonderful gentleman who just came from Gilligan Island talking about a manifesto. He's with Spectacle Films, and he's a New Yorker. And he's also with Zimu Records, writer, director, producer, artist, and academic. He produced The War on Kids, winner of the Best Educational Documentary Award at the New York Independent Film and Video Fest. Also produced Ikland or Ikland. He'll tell me more about that. Also, The War on Drugs, Relax, It's Just Sex, Boris the Dog, and more. He is just a wonderfully creative person. And, of course, with the Gilligan Island Manifesto, it makes me want to talk about it with a little buddy, of course, here, along with the skipper, Marianne, and Professor, everybody else, the Howells. We'll just talk about this manifesto and how it came together. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the New York area, from Gilligan's Island, in a little manifesto area, where I'm sure there's coconuts plenty, Cevin Sulling. Cevin, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Not a problem. So you've have a new release called Gilligan's Island Manifesto, which talks about comparing with how Gilligan's Island relates to the parties that you'd be happy to talk about. You're also president of Spectacle Films, Zimu Records. You also produced The War on Kids, Ikland, The War on Drugs, Relax, It's Just Sex, Boris the Dog. And before we get into your works, tell us how you got started.
How I got started? Wow. So I got started, I guess, I always planned on being a writer, and so it was just basically waiting to be done with school so I could finally start to do the things that I wanted to do. And I'd written a whole series of short stories, and I was reading about this one thing that sort of came up in an interview with Paul McCartney, because I'm a huge Beatles fan.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, huge Beatles fan. And he had mentioned something in an interview that I'd never seen him, mention before. And usually he gets asked the same questions and he gives the same answers, and it's very tiresome. But suddenly he mentioned how he was having dinner with John Lennon, and Lennon had proposed the two of them get holes drilled in their heads because Lennon had heard that it helps expand your consciousness.
Holes drilled in heads? Oh, my goodness. That's painful. Ouch.
So McCartney told Lennon, he's like, tell you what, John, you get it done, and if it works out well, then we can talk. But Paul had no intention of drilling a hole in his head, but John was dead set on doing this. And I was really curious about this, and I ended up doing a little bit of research, and I found out that this was actually something that was, well, first it was something that was practiced, among different cultures all over the world, 10,000 years ago during the Neolithic era. And it's this archaeological riddle. Why was your ancestors, my ancestors, why were they drilling holes in their heads? And they don't know, but they know that they were alive when the holes were drilled, and they lived many years with holes in their heads, but it's just a mystery. So this doctor came up with this theory that if you drill a hole in your head, it will result in increased brain blood volume that would lead to improved brain metabolism, better brain functioning. So somehow Lenin heard about this and decided he wanted it done, and it was this doctor, this Dutch doctor, who proposed this, and the doctor tested his theory by drilling a hole in his own head, and and he believed it had the desired effect. He believed that he was changed for the better as a result of this, and he wrote about his findings, and this influenced a number of students from Oxford who came over to Amsterdam and met with him, and then they drilled holes in their heads, and soon there was this whole movement of people drilling holes in their heads in the late 60s into the 70s, and I guess even into today. It's still going on, and so I did this film about it. Was like, perhaps this was the reason why Neolithic man was doing it, and for improved brain function, and I decided to make a film out of this research process, even though I'd never made a movie before. And the film became this cult classic and aired on the Learning Channel, and and a whole bunch of other stuff. And this was my first project out of the gate, and that was how I ended up making movies.
That is amazing too. And when you talk about a hole in the head, I thought that would make you holy. That's what I thought of.
Well, it does that too, I suppose. I guess that's unavoidable.
And did that exactly work very well for a lot of people? And did it actually improve? It decreased, or what were the findings out that having a hole drilled in their heads?
So I never tested it, but so I can't speak from firsthand experience. However, some research was done. Yuri Moskalenko, this Russian physiologist, had done some studies that seemed to show that perhaps it does impact lead to increased brain blood volume, which would lead to more oxygen and glucose to the brain and high, greater brain metabolism. I wouldn't say it's conclusive, just one study, but the one study did suggest that that this might actually be beneficial. And New Scientist, a British journal, had reviewed the study and seemed to believe that it met the appropriate scientific protocols. I don't know. It might be beneficial. I'm not telling people to go out and do it, but one of the people who drilled a hole in their heads was actually a professor at Oxford who had Bill Clinton as a student.
Oh wow!
Yeah. When Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, his professor. Well, not at the time. Didn't have a hole in his head at that time, but did later drill a hole in his head. So
drilling Bill Clinton. Hill, oh my goodness, Monica or Hillary?
Well,
I know, I'm kidding. It just makes me think of it. I'm just going off on this as well too. And of course, you also had another one too called "You're in Good Health." So that's a good play on words. And just tell us about that.
So that was the follow-up after I made Hole in the Head, which was, like I said, it became this cult classic, and it's still this sought-after movie, and there's footage in the movie of that you'd expect of people drilling holes and stuff. So it is pretty gruesome at times. But you kind of have to see it to appreciate what's going on. But so the follow-up was about this practice called auto-urine therapy, where people drink their own urine for the supposed health benefits. Mm-hmm. And Gandhi practiced this, and it's widely practiced in India and elsewhere. And there wasn't much controversy that I expected. The medical community seemed to be like, there's it's urine sterile, and there can certainly be health benefits from it. But what was interesting, and there's actually two medications. There's urokinase and Premorol. Premorol is made from horse urine, but urokinase is made from human urine, and one's a heart heart medicine. So there is actually medicine derived from urine. But what surprised me was, I was wondering, well, how do they collect the urine for urokinase? And I found out how they do it. Porta potties. If you ever use a porta potty,
oh my gosh!
It's actually yes. There's a little filter where the urine can be collected and yeah. So the
or as they say, you're in, you're out.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing when you think about it. And then a lot of really expensive medication in hospitals they'll collect from bedpans and recycle it.
Wow.
So, yeah, because you only absorb maybe 20% of vitamins, medication, and anything you consume. Most of it goes through you and it exits out through your urine. But so. Like I said, only about 20% of most of what you eat in terms of nutrients or medications are actually absorbed into the system.
That is amazing, too. And you also completed work on Mr. Cevin and the cargo cult, about a cargo cult in Vanuatu. Did I say that right?
You did, Vanuatu. Some people really struggle with that. My father always struggled with that, never quite got it right. But yes, Vanuatu. It used to be called the New Hebrides when it was a colony of both Britain and France, and they got their independence in 1980, which is pretty late in the game. And I made three long trips and spent time with this tribe there that worships America.
Wow, how so?
And well, it's a fascinating story, but basically the islands. So Vanuatu is an archipelago of 83 islands, and one of the islands is the island of Tanna, and the British. It was so remote that the British and French both claimed it as their own, but it was too far away for them to fight one another over it, so they ruled it jointly. Which most colonization people think of negatively and understandably so, but the colonizers typically would do things that benefited the people to some degree. For one thing, just out of necessity, they would do things like develop the infrastructure of the locales that they would colonize. But because of the expense of that, neither the British nor French wanted to do anything that was remotely beneficial to the people, like develop roads and build various infrastructure that would support the people, because they're like, well, why should we build systems for water or anything of that nature? Let the French do it, and the French let the British do it. We're not so they would steal the natural resources, and they'd exploit the labor of the people, but they did nothing for them. It was. And then it got particularly brutal over time, because they sent their missionaries there, and the missionaries would burn down villages and murder and imprison tribal chiefs to try to get them to convert to their various branches of religion, and which was absolutely savage and brutal. And when World War II broke out, the United States had used one of the islands, the island of Santo, as the headquarters for the operation, for the theater of war in the South Pacific. So that was how the New Hebrides was instrumental to fighting the Japanese. And the play, the musical South Pacific, was based on that.
Really?
Yeah. So South Pacific takes place. I don't think they ever stated explicitly, but that's about the soldiers being on the island of Santo. And Bali High, they didn't even change the name, if you know the musical. That was when the Americans came, they moved all the women off the island to Bali High, so to prevent the soldiers from exploiting or they're women. So that was why that it was this desirable place to go. But what turned out was, after being just savagely brutalized by the British and French, the Americans came along with their war machine, and everything that seemed impressive among the British and French in terms of their ships and their technology was just profoundly dwarfed by the aircraft carriers and the whole machinery that the Americans brought. But the most remarkable thing was the Americans lived up to all of our noblest ideals. They acted as if they were guests on the island. They treated all of the islanders, with respect. They recruited their labor, but they paid them handsomely for their efforts. And they routinely gave everyone on the island medical care. When they asked the people if they wanted anything, they said, well, some food would be nice, and they gave them 50 times more food and other materials that they ever could have dreamed of. And so word got around. There might have been limited communication. But they still knew of the atrocities that the Japanese were committing on neighboring islands. Word gets out, even somehow with communication and boats and stuff. So they appreciated being under the protection of Americans, and the Japanese never made it to Vanuatu, and they just described the time the Americans were there as a nonstop party. It was just absolutely amazing. They were liberated. They were able to practice their traditional native beliefs and practices. And then the Americans left, and the British and French took over. And this is like, the French had just been under occupation by the Nazis. The British were bombed, routinely and daily by the Nazis, and they reinstated their basically their despotic regime and control. They outlawed all of their traditional practices again, and before the Americans left, they couldn't take all of their tanks and supplies and everything with them, so they offered it to the British and French at 10 cents on the dollar.
Wow!
And this is after the U.S. had just saved their butts, and both of them in World War II, and they said to the Americans, yeah, I don't think so. You're not going to take it back with you, and why should we pay 10 cents on the dollar for what you're going to leave behind for free? So the Americans just drove everything into the ocean as a middle finger to the Europeans. They drove all the jeeps and vans and everything. They just threw it into the ocean.
My goodness!
Rather than let the British and French. Well, they couldn't take it back with them because it would have affected there was so much that it would have affected the value. That was part of the reason why they couldn't take it back, was they didn't want to devalue. If there was a glut of all this, all this. So it was that, or give it to them for free, which wasn't going to happen. But if you scuba dive there, you can scuba dive into the jeeps and sit in the jeep and with your hands on the steering wheel and stuff in the water and stuff, because they've got like amazing scuba diving there and stuff. So it's kind of interesting and stuff. So the British and French continued their oppressive regime, and then the Americans came back and managed to they gave one of the tribal leaders who hadn't been imprisoned an American flag, and told them to raise the flag, and that America would have their back. And the British and French saw the American flag and were incensed, and asked them where he got it, how they could put this foreign nation's flag up on their island, and the Americans intervened and eventually negotiated getting the British and French to back off, and allowed them to free their tribal leaders. And so they raised the American flag on the island every day, and the anniversary, February 15th, of the release of the tribal leaders, they have all the tribes come together and do dances, and the highlight is when these select men, about 200 of them, paint USA on their chests and back, and they walk around with bamboo poles and do these remarkable in-step precision military marches. As part of this ceremony in front of the American flag, and it's amazing, and it's trippy, and it's really it's heartwarming, seeing the results of American policy done right.
That is amazing too. And I was going to ask you about Vanuatu. Is it considered a capitalist country, or would you call it was it like a Democrat or socialist or communist, or what would you consider along those political and social lines for Vanuatu?
It's democratic with an asterisk. It's very few places. Despite a lot of the rhetoric today, very few places, including Europe, are as free as the United States. There's a lot of restrictions. The government has some. It's democratic, but the government has a bit more power than what we're used to and experience.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing too. And speaking of political and social climates, as discussed, we'll talk about the Gilligan Manifesto along those lines. Listen to the Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can also check our Facebook page, facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, also on Radio Public, Anchor FM, and watch the interview on the Mike Wagner Show on YouTube, and subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show, and take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with Cevin Selling, the owner of Spectacle Films and Zemu Records. Works as writer, director, producer, artist, and academic. He's produced such works like A Hole in the Head, which was broadcast on Discovery and the Learning Channel. Also, You're in Good Health, Mr. Cevin and the Cargo Cult. He's also produced Ikland, The War on Kids, The War on Drugs, Relax is Just Sex, Boris the Dog, and more. And we're going to get to the most recent work called The Gilligan Manifesto, a reflection of political and social climate in the early 60s, which is during the Cold War. Gilligan's Island depicted Americans in an analog of a post-apocalyptic world where survivors must rebuild civilization, and they create a communist paradise. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about that, little buddy, a skipper would say.
Well, you kind of shared it all, but no. So basically, yeah, I'm a huge fan of Gilligan's Island. I just loved the show, and at some point it came out in reruns, and I would just sort of deconstruct the show for whoever was around, and one of my friends told me, you really should write this down, and it never really occurred to me how that my interpretation was, I guess it was so evident to me that I was surprised that, that others couldn't quite see or perceive it. But basically, you have this show that at first, the pilot of the show was actually filmed, literally the day that, or the day after JFK was assassinated.
Oh, I remember that. Yes, that was sad, JFK. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And if you look at the opening, footage of the SS Minnow going out into the water, you can see there are some flags, and the flags are at half mast because of the Kennedy assassination. So that's kind of dark and trippy and weird, but it also puts things into perspective as far as the timing. So you have this TV show that came out during what was pretty much the height of the Cold War, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I think a lot of people at the time suspected that Castro or perhaps Russia or someone had been involved with the assassination. So there was certainly a lot of tension there, but here you have at this height of tensions of with the Soviet Union, and one of the most popular TV programs depicted 7 Americans living in a post-apocalyptic society, and by that it's the shipwreck and the storm that shipwrecked them was an analog for nuclear annihilation, because this was big on everyone's heads. They were thinking about, what if there's nuclear war, and how will I survive, and so people had bomb shelters in their home. That was fairly common in suburbia to at least consider it, and many people certainly had it or some approach. So there was a great interest in surviving, or how one would survive a nuclear war, and so so on a visceral level, people knew that the storm, that the shipwreck and this primitive conditions were basically kind of the notion of how do these people survive what is nuclear annihilation, and what do? They build a society that's pure communist, and that's what's the most mind-blowing thing. And not only do they build a society that adheres to to pure Marxist communism, but the conflicts in a lot of the episodes, if you watch them, some vestige of democratic capitalism is introduced because it's kind of what they know, and it ends up leading to chaos. And the conflicts in each of the episodes, is commonly from a result of some some vestige of them trying to impose democracy into the society, which leads to this destabilization, and it has to be removed by the end of the episode for harmony to be restored, where communism prevails in the end of every episode, and in order for there to be this social cohesion.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, too. It goes from a 3-hour tour to being there for 3 years, and makes you wonder, too, were you actually glad they left the island to get back to society, or you just kind of sad you wish they kind of stayed around a little longer?
Well, as far as the show is concerned, they never, they were stuck on the island. The show was actually picked up for a fourth season, but not by CBS. It was the show was set to be renewed, and the wife of Bill Paley, the president of CBS, was upset that Gunsmoke was going to be canceled in the next season, and she insisted that Gunsmoke not be canceled, and so someone had to, or it was either Gunsmoke or Bonanza, I think it was Gunsmoke, and so someone had to take the axe because the wife of the president didn't want her favorite show to be, canceled, and so Gilligan's Island was canceled. But it was still going to survive because another station was going to pick it up because it was a very popular show. Mm-hmm. But they destroyed the props before the other network. I think so. It was on CBS. I think ABC was going to pick it up, but the props were destroyed before word got out that ABC was going to take it over. So it was prematurely canceled, and they never got off the island. There was no real final episode. There were 3 movies that were made afterwards, where they got rescued and stuff. But those, I wouldn't consider those part of the canon of Gilligan's Island, if you want to be a purist.
And what are some of the things that stood out in your mind when it came to Gilligan Island Manifesto? It's like, what really stood out in your mind, and what was like strong that when you had produced this, was the most strongest theme that just really got instilled in you?
Yeah, so the movie's just the Gilligan Manifesto, which is a play on the Communist Manifesto, and there were a few episodes. There's one where they don't have any leader on the island because they don't need a leader, and that kind of comes out, and there's a dispute where the skipper thinks he's the leader, and Mr. Howell insists that he is. And some would argue that others are, but so they decide, but they don't need a leader. It's a
okay, little buddy.
so they end up having an election for president, and Gilligan is depicted as someone who can't even tie his own shoelaces, but he ends up winning the presidency. So now they have this person who's quite incompetent, who's the president, and the social contract for democracy is that it doesn't matter how inept or incompetent your leader is, you have an agreement that you have to adhere to the rules of democratic capitalism, of democracy, where this person is your leader, even if it means, as it would on an island, potentially your doom, if they're truly that incompetent. And what happens? So now they all accept that Gilligan is their president, but they all want positions in the cabinet because they know if they get a position, Secretary of Labor, the Chief Justice, Vice President, whatever it is, they know as they won't have to work. That being an elected leader means that you don't have to expend any labor, and so it's already just a seething indictment of our democracy, and so they all get positions, and none of them work, and everything kind of falls apart. And actually, the only person who ends up working is Gilligan, and but no one will assist him because they've all got positions in his cabinet, and so that's one example. I think the best example though is they decide. Gilligan is doing a project for Mr. Howell, and he stumbles on a chest, and it looks like a treasure chest, but it's locked. And there's a dispute over who owns it. Does Gilligan own it because he was doing the digging, or does Mr. Howell own it because he was sort of employing Gilligan, to do the work? He wasn't paying Gilligan, but he had requested Gilligan. So they can't decide who owns it. So they decide to set up a legal system with the professor acting as judge. And there's a philosopher, Ivan Ilyich, who says that the systems create the dysfunctions that they're supposed to cure. So basically, hospitals make people sick, and in this case, you see not everyone. Obviously, some people are going to be sick regardless, but the institutions breed the illness, and it's perfectly illustrated here because they create a justice system, and within minutes, everyone is suing one another. They're suing one another for libel or false accusations and all sorts of things. So suddenly the professor has 7 cases on his docket when he's just supposed to be making a decision on who owns this this chest, and the professor ends up giving the ruling, and the ruling is perfectly consistent with communism, that everything on the island belongs to all of them, and that includes the chest, all the resources, everything, and because they're communists, the chest doesn't belong to Gilligan or the Howells, it belongs to everyone, and and that was the decision that makes it quite clear that this is a show about communism.
Now, if you're involved in that scenario, would you agree with that decision or not?
It's the correct decision for the island, absolutely. Yes, just because communism works on an island of 7 people doesn't mean that communism works, in a situation where there are more than 7 people.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at. But if you were involved, would you agree with that decision? Why or why not?
It's definitely the right decision, and it's the right decision, like I said, because you're dealing with 7 people, and there are different rules, with different numbers of people. It really it does change things, because with 7 people, everyone's voices, everyone's voice can be heard. Everyone becomes an individual. And that's part of the consequence that they advertise in terms of communism on the show, is that all these people, except for the proletariat, the only people who are named are Gilligan and Marianne. The other ones, and they're the proletariat, they're the working class. Everyone else is defined by their profession. The millionaire, the skipper, the professor, the movie star. None of them have identities. But on the island, they actually become fully developed, fully realized people. They become human beings, and they have to, engage in labor, and it's, through the contributions of their labor to the society, from their abilities to the need. That's, the fundamental of communism. They become whole people. Mr. Howell, in particular, you see him transform from this capitalist to a human being who's appreciated and loved as an individual by the others on the island, and that's sort of a testament to the advertisement of communism on the show, but it's just because it works in a fiction fantasy world of 7 people.
Yeah, exactly. That's what makes me think of too. And of course, based on the Gilligan Island Manifesto, what countries do you think would exactly fall into this Gilligan Island Manifesto? What countries would that remind you of?
Well, none, except, but not totally none. I'd say, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, have basically a communist society. I'd say there are a number of tribal societies that lean toward communism. Many of the tribal societies have chiefs, but the chiefs, it's their goal to distribute resources among the people fairly and evenly. So they're kind of a facilitator of a kind of communism. So I'd say in a society where resources are homogeneous, they might still be scarce, but you don't have diversity among resources, and where you have a society of no more than a certain number of people. There's a threshold. I don't know what that threshold is. A couple hundred, maybe less, maybe 80. But beyond that, I think it's not going to work.
And of course, based on the characters of Gilligan's Island as well too, what world leaders would fit well with the characters?
What world leaders? Well, yeah,
world leaders, world politicians, or somebody in power, like say the Queen or President of Venezuela, Japan, or Germany, the King and Queen of England, or something, or even our president.
I think all the characters are so fundamentally likable and have such good hearts that tragically it's hard to associate them with any contemporary world leaders. of any political, persuasion. So that's a neutral statement. Yeah, I can't really think of any. I think, like I said, and there's certain, and there's something very innocent about them as well, in a cartoonish kind of way, caricaturish way, that they're innocent. And then, there's certainly one of the things that is a confounding factor in terms of applying anything realistically is there's no sex on the island.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, exactly. That's another part we'll get to as well too. We'll get to about one of the tribes. I mean, just a fascinating idea. Of course, Gilligan's Island Manifesto. Where can they find that?
Oh, so Amazon Prime or online. It should be pretty much all the online sources as far as viewing it. It had been in theaters, and now it's a digital. So it's just the Gilligan Manifesto, okay. And it's very funny. So it's like there's a lot of clips from the show in there. It's not all this philosophizing and stuff like that. And there's also some funny footage showing the prevalence of that theme of the fear of the apocalypse, of nuclear annihilation.
I think that's been very prevalent too. We'll talk about a similar tribe you're talking about. We'll talk about one of the whole sex things. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Look for a professional website without breaker and budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs at below the competition way. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@SonicWebStudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on MikeWagnerShow.com. You can check our Facebook page at Facebook.com/The Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also on Radio Public and Anchor FM, and watch the interview on the YouTube channel on The Mike Wagner Show. Subscribe to The Mike Wagner Show on YouTube and take The Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with Cevin Selling, president of Spectacle Films, Zemu Records, and he recently released Gilligan's Island Manifesto. We talked about that and the intricacies of the show, the tribal and everything else with the political and social climate. And speaking of political and social climate, so you also produced and directed Ikland, a film about a tribe in northern Uganda, described as the most despicable people on the planet by an anthropologist, studied him over 40 years ago. You can just tell us all about that.
Okay, yeah. So there was this anthropologist who's Colin Turnbull, who's very, very well respected. He graduate from Oxford University, where he got his PhD, became director of African ethnology at the Museum of Natural History in New York. So a major figure. And he had studied the Pygmy tribe and wrote this book called The Forest People. He absolutely loved the Pygmy, thought they were amazing. And then he goes off to northern Uganda to study this tribe called the Ik. And there's been some effort to I noticed when I was doing my research, and I went to Museum of Natural History and talked to other anthropologists and others, and they were all referring to them as the Ik, E-E-K. But the Ik call themselves the Ik. I asked the Ik. they call themselves Ik. So they might want to call them Ik, but that's not what they're calling themselves. But when Turnbull was there, he was there for roughly 3 years, and he just had a terrible time. And he just described them as the most despicable people. He said that there's no joy, there's no love among the Ik, that they exploit one another. Children will steal food from the elderly. Parents will starve their kids to death. They don't sing. They don't dance. The only recreation is Schadenfreude, which is they basically, the only time they laugh is at the misfortune of one another, and to that end, their recreation is creating misfortune for one another. And since they don't have much, they would allegedly defecate in front of one another's huts for the pleasure of making one another miserable. The book, when it came out, it was called The Mountain People. Came out in, I think, 1972, and there had been this hippie philosophy that still persisted around that time, and it was basically adopted from Rousseau, who was this French philosopher who basically said that man at his core is good, and it's society that creates competition that turns man against man. And if that the core of man, if we can just get beyond that, is fundamentally good. And here was basically it was considered that tribal societies, which were free from the pressures of capitalism and the competition, there was the expectation is that they should be noble and treat one another well, and here was this depiction of these people that was just savage and brutal. So it was a very, very disturbing and shocking book when it came out, because it undermined that whole philosophy. And there was a biologist who wrote this book that was sort of called Lives of a Cell, and he was commenting on the book and was saying that you can't really use this as an example, because basically he was saying that each member of the Ik has become a nation, and this is how nations treat one another, and that it's not really representative of people at their core. But the article was only 3 pages long, and because it was 3 pages long, it was used as a reading exercise when I was in junior high. And when you're in junior high and you read about tribes taking craps in front of one another's huts, it's the funniest thing in the world. So it stuck with me, and I was like, I wonder if, what it would be like to track these people down, 20, 30 years later, however many years it was after, 20 years later, I don't know, after being in junior high. And I had this crazy idea, but the internet didn't have any information on them. And when I was showing the article to people, most people thought, well, this is a joke, because it was so extreme. If you read it, it's pretty funny. And they were they were thinking like this is just fiction, kind of. But then after doing a bit of research, I found out no, these people are real. But the problem is northern Uganda is a really, really, really dangerous place that's really, really hard to get to, because at that time the Lord's Resistance Army had this the child soldiers, and was just brutalizing the north. And if you managed to get past them to the very north, you had the Turkana and the Karamoja, which are these two warring tribes that walk around pretty much naked, except for they've got scarification, and some have lip plugs and some of the traditional things, but they carry AK-47s and bandoliers of bullets. So it's pretty scary and dangerous, and they're cattle raiders, and they will indiscriminately shoot people just for giggles. Mm-hmm. So dodging them, as well as the terrain, which is just unbelievably unforgiving and harsh, and wild animals and insects and snakes and stuff. It was a huge mistake going there. But,
oh man.
Yeah, and but it was, every day, without exception, every day there was something new, harrowing, and horrible that I can't believe I survived in retrospect. And I still periodically get nightmares from my time there. We were we could drive just so far, then we had to hike, because we were driving on dry riverbeds. But there was one place where there was an ambush set for us, and we were ordered out of our vehicle at gunpoint. Myself, the cameraman, and the crew, and we were marched into the woods where they were going to shoot and kill us and take our stuff. But I'd taken a Polaroid camera, and I right when they had taken us, told us to get out of our vehicle, I'd taken a Polaroid of them, and they didn't know from cameras or anything like that. Mm-hmm. There's no technology up there other than guns, and so I'd basically taken the photo so there'd be some record of the people that murdered us.
My!
But but by the time we were marched into the bush, and where they were going to off us, the film, the photo had mostly dried, hadn't completely dried, but was dry enough that you could make out the images, and they had never seen themselves. They had no idea what they looked like, which is kind of mind blowing to think about. They'd never seen themselves. Maybe reflection in water, but it's not quite the same. And so they recognized themselves, because they knew that it had to be them, and they were they were actually starting to laugh hysterically. They were pointing at one another and they were just laughing, and we just kind of, made our way back to our vehicle while they were laughing at the photo, and so entranced by it and stuff. So yeah, Polaroid saved our lives. And but every day it was something horrible. And it was that was just one day. There was another day lions descended on our campsite, and we just were cowering in our tents while lions were circling for 4 hours. And another time we were camped out in a place where the villagers, the Dodoth tribesmen, had anthrax. It was just a bad time until we got to the Ik. The Ik themselves were wonderful. That was, the people who were supposed to be the most horrible were great, and they did sing and they did dance, and Turnbull was was not quite factual, which is unfortunate in terms. I mean, it's fortunate for the people, but it's not fortunate for academic truth.
But it did win some awards, too, at the Boston International Film Fest.
Oh, yeah.
Great reviews in the New York Times, Discovery Magazine, and everything. So something did good come off it, and irregardless who really gives a crap, as they say.
Well, yeah. But yeah, it was, I'm glad I made the film, and I'm glad I was able to redeem the reputation, to those who were aware that the reputation had been, besmirched.
Yeah. And of course, speaking of wars and everything else, we'll talk about a couple of war movies. So listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on themikewagnershow.com. You can check our Facebook page, facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. You can also download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, as well as Radio Public and Anchor FM. Also, watch the interview on the YouTube channel, subscribe to The Mike Wagner Show, and take The Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. We're here with Cevin Sulling, the president of Spectacle Films and Zemu Records. He also produced the Gilligan Island Manifesto. We talked about that. We also talked about some of the other movies involving political and social climate, and also tribes as well, too. Now let's get to the war and a couple of things like the war on kids and the war on drugs. You guys had won quite numerous awards, and you can just tell us all about that. What inspired you guys to do it?
Oh, those are two very different movies, but I guess maybe there's similarities in some ways. So the war on drugs was a movie that came out, a while back at the onset, well, a little past the onset of the drug war, but it was when the propaganda machine had really stepped up, and I found that to be just one of the worst casualties. They would say like the worst casualty or the first casualty of war was truth. And it's not that there aren't dangers with taking illegal drugs, but when they're exaggerated and then everything becomes a lie and no one believes everything. But it also affects our trust for the government, and when the government is investing in a propaganda machine as opposed to informing its people, I found that to be profoundly undermining faith in government, the role of government, its trust in its people. You're supposed to have a democracy, and you have such contempt for your own people that you think the only way to, provide public health is to lie to them. So it was an angry piece, but it was the funny thing about the film was that it was a comedy. So it was basically making fun of all the anti-drug propaganda that was out at the time by showing spoofs of them, by showing just how perverted the logic was of what they were showing, it would just be these outrageous anecdotal scenarios or something, or profound exaggerations, and so I was just showing how the same type of bad logic could be used to promote drugs, and it was a comedy, but it was somehow treated by everyone as a documentary, which I find hilarious.
Almost a reverse psychology, yes.
It was considered a documentary. It was distributed by Warner, so it was like got major distribution and stuff. But they stocked it on they stocked it on the shelves as documentary. It was listed as documentary. It won best documentary from High Times magazine, which that at least is sort of funny and High Times has this thing called the Stony Award for and it didn't win for best movie or best comedy, or it went for documentary, which is I don't know what to make of that, but it's kind of hilarious. The War on Kids was a very different movie, and that was sort of a movie that was I felt I was born to make, and it was it deals with the American school system, and it was I started work on it just as there was the rise in zero tolerance, and it was this awareness that the same generation, that hippie generation that had fought so hard for marching for civil rights, had become fundamentally fascist. And that the generation that had called for all this was now instigating the worst abuses in compulsory schooling that America had ever seen, in terms of all of its policy, one strike and you're out, and putting resource officers, police officers in schools, and turning things that are not even not even crimes, yet somehow students could be arrested for them and put in jail. And even when they were, if they were wrong about things, it didn't matter. It was, there was a kid, for instance, I mean, there was like thousands of these stories, but there was a child who had lemon drops, and it was a brand that they didn't, recognize, and they were, they thought maybe it was drugs. And of course it turned out it was candy, but they upheld the putting the expulsion and I think perhaps arrest on the grounds that, well, it could have been drugs. and there's just story after story of this kind of insane injustice, and and then the cameras in the classrooms and the hallways and everywhere, and the metal detectors, and just treating kids like criminals before they've just for no reason, the pathologizing of youth where where normal behavior is treated as something dysfunctional, and having to drug them into submission. So that movie, is just a very angry piece about just what's happened to schools, and but I learned a lot more making that. I mean, I spent about 8 or 10 years making that movie, and I came to the realization that schools have always been bad, and that they cannot be reformed, and that they are fundamentally destructive, and they do much more harm than good. And that was a disturbing realization.
Mm-hmm. And it also made some, really lighthearted ones too, like Relax It's Just Sex, starring Jennifer Tilly, Lori Petty, Cindy Williams, Boris the Dog, which won the Primo Nouveau Award, and also you also produced a Bill Johnson show, and The Summer of Hate involving the Beatles, and maybe just tell us briefly about that.
So the Summer of Hate is what I'm working on right now, and it's a dark movie, but it deals with the summer of 1966, and it was at this time when the whole landscape of America, had profoundly changed. Most people think of the 50s as one thing and the 60s as another. If I just say the 50s and 60s, and it evokes certain images in your head of what America was like, but the 60s really didn't really become different from that image of the 50s until the Watts riots in 65, and by 66, you had like 12 or 13 race riots that year. You had the emergence of the celebrity mass killer, Richard Speck, who murdered 8 nurses in Chicago, and Charles Whitman, who gunned down 37 people in University of Texas. Before then, you had some mass killings, but you didn't really have the personality associated with it, which sort of imbued it with this whole other level of horror. You had the first civil rights leader who was shot, James Meredith, marching outside of Memphis. You had the Vietnam protests really first started that year. And then through it all, you have the Beatles touring the United States, and there's this backlash against the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And at every show, the KKK was rallying. And the theory is, that most people think it was that the protests and the pushback against the Beatles at that time was because of John Lennon making this comment about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus.
I remember that, yes.
and that wasn't the reason. I mean, it was hyped as, and it certainly built it, but it wasn't in and of itself, without corrupting the context. It wasn't a controversial statement in and of itself at the time, because religion in general at that time in history had gone through a decline. There was just a lot less interest in religion. Mm-hmm. Society had become more secular, and there was a lot of concern among the churches. How do we get people back? How do we respond to this? So it wasn't a radical statement, and Lennon wasn't saying that the Beatles were better, and there was no way to really no one would have construed that from the statements if a couple of DJs in Alabama hadn't made it sound like that's what Lennon was saying. But what was really being pushed back against had to do with race, and it was McCartney was really taking the lead there and had been decrying racism in the United States and segregation. Well, the Beatles were united on that. And during their 64 tour, the Beatles said, and this was the first tour of America, they didn't know if they were going to be around for another week, because, that was sort of how things went with bands. They were not around for very long. They'd be big, one day and gone the next. And
right.
They said there was no way they were going to play a segregated venue. And lo and behold, Tallahassee, Florida, which was scheduled on their tour, was segregated, and the Beatles said there's no way we're going to play a segregated venue. And so there was a lot, as they're going through their dates, the press are saying, are you going to play Tallahassee? And the Beatles are like, no, we're not. And Tallahassee backed down and agreed to desegregate. And the Beatles also refused to play at segregated hotels. Well, even though it was this sent shockwaves out to the community, and little lesser venues desegregated because the main venue desegregated. But there was an op-ed that came out at the time in Tallahassee, was who are these people, these foreigners coming in, these interlopers trying to tell us what we how we should live. And they didn't mention the desegregation, but it was all very clear that this is what it was about. Mm-hmm. And and it put all these other venues on notice that, the Beatles are going to come back, obviously, in '65, and if you want the Beatles, you got to desegregate, and so it really, sent out, a message. And the Beatles were not just instrumental in their, in supporting the movement, they were directly instrumental in a lot of the desegregation that took place in the United States. And and this was an opportunity for backlash, and the way it was instigated was there was Teen Book magazine. The editor-in-chief had licensed these interviews with the Beatles. One was the one where Lennon made his Jesus comment, but another
right.
was McCartney saying it's a lousy country where anyone who's black is called a dirty N-word. Mm-hmm. And this was the cover of the magazine, as a headshot of Paul. That headline on the top of it. The DJ, was annoyed at the South for perpetuating segregation and stuff. And he said, hey, we know you DJs like the Beatles. Look what they think about, you're sorry people, and sent this advanced copies, to them. And they thumbed through the issues and found Lennon's statement, and because they weren't going to deal or address race issues, so they went all over that, and that was how it started. But the very first place to burn the records was right outside Tallahassee. It wasn't in Alabama. It was outside Tallahassee.
I was going to mention something about that statement with John Lennon, and there was a couple of reports out there, especially for one of my professors back up in Illinois. He said that the reason why John Lennon made that statement is because he was getting tired, or they were getting tired, of being worshipped over Jesus Christ, and people are just worshiping the wrong things. He said that out of sarcasm. He's like, we're getting tired of being worshipped. That's what it sounded like. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but he made the statement like sarcasm. It's like, we're just tired of being worshipped over Jesus. I don't know if I'm right or not.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, in that one of the things that started happening on the later tours was a lot of people, who had, disabilities and other kinds of ailments, were brought to the front and were brought up to the Beatles in the hopes that if they touched the Beatles, that they would, hopefully be cured. And so these were the people the Beatles were being paraded, seeing these tragic desperate people who were very unfortunate, but this was like, this was the Beatles tour. Now they would barely get, they would be paraded among these people, and they knew they didn't have any special powers, and yet, how do you respond? How do you act, when a person who's in a very unfortunate situation is paraded there. So yeah, it's so yeah, a lot of what you're saying, there was this belief that they had some aura, some religious aura and stuff to them. So yeah, it's just sad all around.
It was almost taken out of context. Like he said, we're just tired of being followed around. It was just like, come on, stop following us. It's like, how the hordes of girls, come over like screaming, and they have to run for their lives practically. So it's just like...
Well, I think they liked some of that. They probably...
Right. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. And when is that going to come out, since you're working on it?
Probably in a year or two. Documentaries take a long time, but probably a year or two it'll be done. But it's going to be a very interesting movie, because like there's a lot of movies that are histories, and you might see a movie in the history of '66 or the '60s or something, and you'll see a movie on the Beatles and the history there, but you'll never see the two laid over. You'll never know that, like, when John Lennon and the Beatles first came to Chicago, which was the first stop. I mean, they flew into New York and then they flew straight to Chicago, where they do the press conference where Lennon sort of apologizes in a way, for the statement. And it's one thing to know that. It's another thing to know that there was race riots going on in Chicago, that lasted a week and only ended like 2 days before, or Richard Speck, the Speck had just killed all these people right there. I mean, just, when you see the turmoil that's all taking place, as a backdrop to what's going on with the Beatles and stuff, it creates a whole different story, and it makes something very interesting. And you never see the two laid over one another. When the Beatles had all these death threats and bomb threats at their various shows, to know that various major figures had just been shot, right in that very same city that they're performing in, it gives it a whole other gravity, and changes how these events look and feel.
That is amazing too. We'll talk about the other movies as well too. I'd like to have you back on, talk about the Beatles and some other things. And, in terms of your films and everything else, developing a genre and everything, who do you consider your favorite directors, or say your favorite actors, or even like, singers and everything else that influenced your career or shaped it?
Wow, that's tough to say. Film I got into, sort of, like I described with Hole in the Head. It was sort of accidental in the sense that it was a way to explore academic subjects or other creative things like my animation. And there are people who have real encyclopedic knowledge of films, and I have that with music. With rock music, I can tell you who played and what and when for how long and what charted, and everything about histories of every band. And people can do that with film, and I could bluff and fake my way through it, but I'd rather I'd rather not. I mean, there are a few, there's certainly some people that I like, but I don't feel like my opinion about directors and actors is any more telling than anyone else's. Where my feelings about music, I think, are educated and sophisticated, where I would insist that I have more of a right to say certain things about certain artists and producers and music. But film, I feel like my opinion doesn't mean anything more than any other person who enjoys movies.
That is amazing too, Kevin. And just a couple of more things here before we let you go. We know you're a very busy guy and getting back to the Beatles and everything. What do you consider your most favorite project and the most challenging?
Wow. If you ask any creative person what their favorite thing is, they're always going to say their current project, whatever they're involved in at the moment, and that's the answer that should be. Because if you're not trying to outdo yourself in what you did, then you're stagnating. So I have to say, The Summer of Hate is my favorite, because it's what I'm working on now. In terms of film, I mean, most challenging, hands down, was going to Uganda and and getting shot at by the LRA and ambushed and other stuff. I mean, it was, that was just harrowing and brutal, and and risking my life on a daily basis, and just coming at some point to terms that there's a good chance I will not go home, and to just accept and deal with that one of those days will be my last, and because the anxiety and the fear was just too much to bear. And it's like, if I just didn't come to accept that I was probably going to die, the fear would have just I wouldn't have been able to exist, and it wasn't going to help. So the Ikland by far was the most challenging, but War on Kids has a certain special place in my heart, because it is something that is from a social, from a civil rights issue. It's, youth are the most neglected population in terms of that. Every group has been fighting for rights in some capacity, but whatever group that you think is the most oppressed, and I don't care which one you pull out of a hat, their children, the children of those people, are going to be the most oppressed, because whatever people are the most oppressed, their children are oppressed by everyone else and their parents, and the society. So the children always have it the worst, and it's it's neglected, and just how bad schools are is something that everyone, people went through, and then they quickly forgot. They only remember the moments that where they endured and survived, and even have somehow happy memories, because you just don't remember the boredom and the injustices. But but the film does jar people. After the screenings of War on Kids, everyone comes up to me and tells me of their unconscionable injustice that they that they had suppressed, that they experienced, that was the hallmark of their youth. And then as far as artistically, the Gilligan Manifesto, I'd say, from so far anyway, is my most elegantly constructed movie as an artistic expression.
That is amazing. Once again, you can find Gilligan's Island Manifesto at on the web, and he'll tell you about that. Who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
Tom Lehrer. Tom Lehrer. He was this satirist, singer, mathematician. He did 3 albums in the 1960, 61, 62 that was sort of as a joke, and just brutal satire, and very, very clever, and he just play piano and sing, and his defining quality was irreverence. And even when I would listen to him when I was very little, because the songs were catchy, and I knew there was something irreverent about it, even though I didn't, I was too little to understand a lot of the things that he was commenting on. But I could still appreciate the irreverence to what he was, describing and discussing, and he's very dark and very funny. And it's certainly something I aspire to, and clever and witty, and are phenomenally articulate, and he's remarkable.
That's amazing too. And just a couple more things. What's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Best advice I can give to anyone about anything?
Whatever you want.
Whatever I want. I guess. I don't know. I'm going to like Bill and Ted, be excellent to one another. I don't know. I guess something to that effect. Sure. It's pursue. I guess it's certainly pursue things that you're interested in, that are going to improve the world, and try to maintain a good spirit about things, and don't hate everyone because they think differently, unless they're being destructive.
That is amazing too. And of course, just wanted to say, Cevin, thank you very much for your time. Been fantastic. Cevin Sulling, the producer and director of Gilligan's Island Manifesto, also president of Spectacle Films and Zimu Records, also with a number of award-winning documentaries: War on Kids, War and the War on Drugs, Ikland, and also Hole in the Head, and many, many more. Check out the Gilligan's Island Manifesto. Tell everybody once again where you can find Gilligan's Island Manifesto.
So Gilligan Manifesto and other films can all be found on Amazon Prime, on YouTube, on iTunes. Pretty much all the all the online outlets. Hulu might have them. I'm not really sure. But certainly, definitely Amazon, definitely, YouTube and others. You can find it in, most of the digital mediums. And you can go to spectaclefilms.com, and if people still buy DVDs, there are always DVDs for sale on Amazon and spectaclefilms.com. So.
And tell everybody your upcoming projects, your website, and how do people contact you?
So spectaclefilms.com, you can go there, and that should there should be contact information there. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
The latest film? Upcoming projects, and how do people contact you?
Yeah, so upcoming film is so Mr. Cevin and the Cargo Cult will be coming out. I think early next year. I'm still working on Summer of Hate, and people can go to spectaclefilms.com and spectaclefilms@gmail.com, or they can reach out if they want.
That is great. Okay, Cevin, just wanted to say you've been fantastic, and I'm ready to go back to being with my little buddy Skipper in Gilligan Island. Thank you very much. You've been fantastic. Looking forward to having you on again soon, and please do us a favor and keep us up to date.
Absolutely, thank you, and I appreciate all the time and interest, and giving me this platform.
Thanks for listening to The Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Listen online at themikewagnershow.com and on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And watch the interview on YouTube. Also, become a sponsor of the program or donate today at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again tomorrow for another episode of The Mike Wagner Show.